Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and I'm joined by my good friend, Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. Hello, Dee. How are you doing?
Hello, Joe. Good to see you.
Who am I hearing in the background? Is it Colby?
Actually, Olive's barking.
Oh, hello. Okay.
Oh, I see Earl of Earl and Steve is here.
Oh, cool. Let me see. Hello, Earl. And hello, Steve. Hope you both are doing well tonight. I guess we'll start off by sharing this on Facebook, huh? So if you give us a minute or so, we will do that. Oh, I'm not seeing that yet. Let's see. Refresh the page. Yeah. Okay, so tonight we'll mainly be talking about uh, the, what we know about the war plans of the United States with respect to Iran, okay, and with respect to Yemen. Uh, we'll be looking at some of the details, and we'll be opining about how successful they're likely to be, given what we know about them. I think we'll have a few surprising considerations to point to, some surprising things to say. Uh, we're going to have two articles concerned, okay, with these things, and a video from Colonel McGregor and the judge dealing with some of those things, and another video from Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson and the judge, uh, which will wrap up our considerations about the possibility of a coming war and what may happen if we have the coming war, okay, as well. So I think this is going to be a very interesting show. Steve asked me, Doc, have you seen all the posts about China's population disappearing? No, I haven't seen that, Steve. Where do they think China's population has gone to? Last I checked, I thought it was 1.4 billion people. Anyway, that is a very interesting subject, but not our main focus for tonight, I don't think. So there we go. Anyway, let us start off with the Colonel McGregor video. Okay, it's the judge having an interview with Colonel McGregor. I think this was on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. I think it's a very, very good video, but we'll be doing a lot of commentary on it, and a lot of analysis too. So I guess before we do that, I'd better share it, or we're going to have a problem.
Yes, I've been busy sharing here.
Okay, thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
So here we go.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, March 27th, 2025. Colonel Douglas McGregor. Now, Colonel, it's been a tumultuous week, and I've been waiting all week to be able to chat with you. Thank you very much for accommodating my schedule with your own. I want to spend some time talking to you about the American preparation, the American military preparation for war against Iran. But before we get there, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you questions about national security and the security of defense plans. So wouldn't operational plans for a military attack be considered secret and to be preserved from unwanted eyes, whether technically classified as classified or not?
No, Judge, you're getting to something that's very important. And this entire event was a real surprise to me, because my experience, which goes back into the 90s and the early years of this century, was that any time a senior officer speaks to another senior officer or to a senior appointed official, Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary, whatever it happens to be, you conduct those conversations over secure lines. That it's automatic. And the reason for that is very simple, that while the stated objective or theme of the meeting may not be classified, inevitably you may go in or wander into that territory. It's natural because people have access to classified information. They bring that up. They discuss it because it impinges on the decision or on the planning. So whether or not, strictly speaking, you're holding a classified conversation, senior officials, as I said, always went through encrypted lines or secure lines. I've never seen anything like this before.
Colonel, tell me if this comment from the Secretary of Defense is consistent with your own understanding of what you just described. You described a high level of acute awareness of the need to secure conversations about military movements. The Secretary of Defense has a slightly different view.
Okay, I feel compelled to add at this point that there were many of us who thought that when Trump was looking for a Secretary of Defense, that at least one of the candidates, was going to be Colonel McGregor, because he had served as an advisor in the first of the Trump administration. And there are certainly some things about Trump's foreign policy that seem to agree with Colonel McGregor's view about what the United States should be doing in the medium term in foreign policy. Anyway, of course, Colonel McGregor never became the Secretary of Defense, and the appointment went to Hegseth. Okay, instead, and of course he was up to his ears in this leak, and said some very stupid things about it once it happened.
Chris, cut number 13.
Nobody's texting war plans. Well, I noticed this morning out came something that doesn't look like war plans. And as a matter of fact, they even changed the title to attack plans because they know it's not war plans.
I guess there's a difference between an attack plan, and a war plan. But from the standpoint of the need for secrecy, when it comes to both kinds of plans, it seems to me that need is pretty clear. If you don't keep those secret, whether they're war plans or attack plans, then you could have a lot of unnecessary deaths that would occur.
There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths, no sources, no methods, no classified information.
put aside the body language, I mean, you can't really. Well, what do you think of what he said? He's trying to gainsay the fact that this was an operational plan with timing and military equipment listed, but because it didn't include other things, somehow it doesn't fulfill the requirement of an attack plan.
First of all, he's in territory he's not familiar with. Let's face it. Mr. Hegseth has not operated at high levels in the Department of Defense or in the Intelligence Committee or State Department or anywhere else that I'm familiar with. So I don't think he has the background and the experience that he probably needs to fully grasp what he's done. And obviously, he's trying to defend himself against attacks. And I certainly understand how he feels, because he's watching people attack him for what he considers to be modest or minor, in the way that people formerly attacked members of the Biden administration, where it was Lloyd Austin or somebody else on what he considers to be equally specious grounds. The point is, though, Judge, he's wrong. And I've been involved in some of these things.
He doesn't say the people in the Biden administration were wrong. Now, he may feel that way, but he's not saying that. He's saying Hegseth is wrong in his viewpoint. Let's find out why.
Stood next to a senior officer who was directed to call the Secretary of Defense. And it was not over what you would call classified matter at all. It had no classification whatsoever. But both sides understood that he was going to get guidance from the Secretary of Defense that should be treated as at least as confidential, and it's not something that the rest of the world needs to hear. And so ultimately, whether he likes it or not, he and everyone else who participated in this disaster looked foolish and unprofessional and amateurish. That's the bottom line. Now, should somebody be removed for being part of this? That's a matter for the president of the United States to decide. I don't know what he will do, but I would suggest that whoever set this up, first and foremost, probably deserves to be on the chopping block. And then the question is, why would anybody go onto something like Signal or any other non-secure line outside of the Defense Department to discuss any of these matters? All of this bodes ill for the administration, makes us look foolish, and it actually robs the president to some extent of maneuver room when he makes decisions to do or not do something.
I think that was a moderate reply from Doug, and I think it was completely justified. Almost obvious, just obvious. I'd like to see somebody try to coherently attack that statement. I mean, I don't think it can be done. It was right on the mark in critiquing what happened.
Right. Chris, run the clip of National Security Advisor Waltz with Laura Ingraham. Do we have that?
So your staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your
that's
phone?
what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That's what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I mean, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone? I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then then somehow it gets
someone
sucked
sent
in.
You that
it gets
contact.
Sucked in.
Was there someone else supposed to be on the chat that wasn't on the chat that you thought was?
So
on
the
chat?
person that I thought was on there was never on there. It was this
who
guy.
was that? What person?
Well, I'm not. Look, okay. Laura, I take responsibility. I built the group.
Okay.
So,
this was not a 15-minute phone call, Colonel. This was a series of text messages that went on for a couple of days. That's Mike Waltz with Jeff Goldberg, the reporter for The Atlantic. I don't know Mr. Goldberg. I know a lot of conservative Republicans despise him. However, he was a mouthpiece for Vice President Cheney's pro-Iraq, pro-Afghanistan propaganda. if you will. I don't know if Waltz is going to be on the chopping block, but I think he made things worse with this nonsense about data being sucked from one phone to the next. I'd like you to watch Congressman Crow, himself a former Navy SEAL, interrogating Director Gabbard. She looks like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet than listening to this. And I thought the interrogation was nothing short of brilliant. Cut number 10.
Director Gabbard, I want to direct your attention again to the text chain where it says, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. Does that indicate to you that there is about to be a military operation?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, earlier in this hearing, we heard about the DoD's classification standards. I want to now turn my attention to your classification standards. You're the Director of National Intelligence. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence classification guide says, quote, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing for an attack, end quote, is to be classified as top secret. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, have the Houthis indicated an ability to shoot down American aircraft?
Yes.
They have in fact done so, haven't they?
Yes.
Including MQ-9 Reapers, haven't they?
That's correct.
And that was one of the systems used in the attack recently that's the subject of this discussion, is it not?
Correct.
Colonel, can the case be made that the Secretary of State committed espionage by failing to safeguard military secrets? There are two, as you know, espionage statutes. One prohibits the willful failure to safeguard. The other prohibits the negligent failure to safeguard.
Potentially, I suppose it is, could be prosecuted, certainly for negligence, which is what I would chalk this up to. Again, you're talking about people without much experience that are in jobs that are way beyond anything they've ever done before. And they're doing things that they did when they were civilians. And you just, that's just an impossibility now. You can't even walk out of your office and make an off-the-cuff statement if you're the Secretary of Defense or the Director of the CIA, Director of National Intelligence, Secretary of State. Whatever you say, your words have to be carefully chosen. Now, they don't seem to understand that anything at that high level involving any potential action or policy that the White House may direct should be treated at least as extremely confidential, if not top secret, which means, again, you go back to the network that you know is encrypted. I'm surprised that whoever works for Secretary Hegseth did not go to him and say, look, you really need to reconsider this discussion and let's put it on the secure network. But then again, he may have done these things without consulting anybody in his office. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I feel badly for Tulsi Gabbard. She's trying to be a loyal member of the Trump team. And there's only so much that she can do. And she has to answer truthfully. And she did. What she said is correct.
I feel sorry for her, too. The person who needs to answer truthfully is the Secretary of Defense. I mean, the Vice President expressed an opinion, a good one. Maybe we should caution against this. Maybe we shouldn't be doing it. Aside from what he said, there's no conversation about the lawfulness, morality, or military necessity of bombing this residential neighborhood in Yemen.
I thought that point was very, very important. And as Doug addresses it now, we will learn more about why that is so important.
Well, Judge, those things never come up, I'm sorry to say. I've never heard anybody bring up those kinds of matters. Because remember, especially the people in the military, but the people in the Department of Defense are treating whatever policy decision is made as a foregone conclusion and sacrosanct. So the notion that you would raise that is just not very probable on the defense side. I'm glad that the representative of the vice president said what he did. And that's probably the one modest, bright light in an otherwise extremely dark sky in this whole matter.
Yeah. Colonel, is the United States preparing for war against Iran?
No, I think so. I don't think there's any question about that, unfortunately. Now, you and I know that this has been going on for a long time, and we've had similar buildups in the past. Yeah, the other thing is the Iranians have allegedly been within a week or 2 weeks or 10 days of having a nuclear weapon off and on for a decade at least. I don't know how many times I've listened to someone from the Israeli government or one of their supporters inside the United States make that argument. But this looks very serious. An enormous amount of firepower is being assembled. I think it's unfortunate that we photograph bombers and ships and other things that are being assembled for an attack and then broadcast that through our media. I wish we would not do that. If I were Secretary of Defense, I would ask the media not to do that, and I probably would ban them from any of the installations where the firepower is being assembled. Unfortunately, it's too late. That's been done. And we don't understand that allegedly the Iranians have missiles that with a maximum range for precision guidance of 2,000 kilometers. That's great. Diego Garcia is just beyond that range. But the next level, the next ranging level for missiles that
Diego Garcia is not just beyond that range. It is much beyond that range. Specifically, with respect to Yemen, it's 3,659 kilometers is the distance from the bomber base. And the distance from there to Iran is 4,842 kilometers. So in the first case, it's nearly twice the distance of the Iranian missiles. In the second case, it's about 2.5 times the range, of the Iranian missiles. Okay. So the Iranian missiles would not be able to take out the air base before any attack actually comes from there. That, is not a possibility. Okay, now maybe if their missiles were fired from ships that could get within the range of 2,000 kilometers, there could be an attack. But there's no indication the Iranians have that kind of capability. So I think it's important to mention that. So I'll go back to Doug.
Both the Russians and the Chinese have, which they could conceivably turn over to the Iranians, is 5,000 kilometers. Now, if those missiles are on hand or they've already been provided, we just don't know. That means that when you assemble aircraft or ships or anything else within that range, they're at risk of being destroyed.
So that's a very good point by Doug. A very good point that it can be the case, and may be the case, that the Russians and the Chinese have already provided some missiles but to Iran that could successfully damage the airbase, the Diego Garcia airbase. And if that's the case, then maybe there would be a surprise for us before we even launch from that airbase. That's at least a possibility that I haven't seen actually mentioned, until Doug has mentioned it here.
And what's to stop an enemy from destroying your aircraft on the tarmac, on the runway, before they ever get a chance to get into the air? So I'm very uncomfortable with all these pictures. I think somebody probably in Washington says, well, this is great. We're intimidating the Iranians. I don't see much evidence for that intimidation. What I see is evidence for revealing too much of what you might do. But that's a problem we have. It's not a new one. We had it during World War II. Interrogations of German senior officers indicated that some of the most valuable intelligence they had during the war came right out of newspapers in the United States.
Colonel, several of our colleagues on this show have stated that among the last advice that Bill Burns, who's the former U.S. ambassador to Moscow and for 4 years was the director of the CIA under President Biden, gave to Director Gabbard and Director Ratcliffe was his opinion that the Iranians do not have a nuclear weapon. Would the United States follow the political needs of Prime Minister Netanyahu over its own intelligence assessments as to what they're targeting, what they're bombing, who they're trying to kill, what they're trying to prevent?
Well, there's certainly a large body of evidence to suggest that that's the case. I mean, we have to ask the question, why would we want to create this tension that can only lead ultimately to the development of a nuclear weapon, not just in Iran, but in many other countries? I mean, if you watch the United States over the last 20, 30 years, the real lesson that you take away from all of it is that if you don't have a nuclear weapon, you are at risk of being destroyed from the air, invaded on the ground, destroyed from the sea. So you ought to invest in a nuclear weapon. And that's why I don't think any of these so-called intimidation tactics work. I think it has the opposite effect. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now today in Iran. And it may be that inside Iran, in that inner circle, someone has said, we have to be ready very, very shortly to field our own nuclear warheads, because if we don't, we risk being destroyed.
Wow.
I hope that's not the case, but I worry a great deal about that.
Does Israel risk being destroyed if Israel and the United States attack Iran? I mean, it'd be one thing for Iran to attack the United States, given the enormous distance, but quite another for Iran to attack Tel Aviv.
Well, remember, I think the last time we talked, I pointed out to some underlying assumptions that are not questioned either in Israel or in Washington. And those assumptions include the Arabs, the Muslim states in general in the region can be bullied. They can be pushed. They can be steamrolled into whatever direction we care to go with impunity. That's number one. Number two,
does that include the Turks?
I think it does. But on the other hand, you have to consider the possibility that we regard the Turks as having been sufficiently bribed or bought off in Syria so as to keep them on side. I mean, remember, it's always a question of bribe, bully, and then bomb. Bomb is the last step if the bribes and the bullying doesn't work. But the second thing is that there's this assumption that we are irresistible, invincible.
Yeah, the three B's, specifically bribe, bully, and bomb.
That the combination of Israeli and American military power, specifically American, cannot be resisted, cannot be defeated. You know, those assumptions I think are dangerous, and we may yet, we may yet get a demonstration of just how inaccurate those assumptions are.
Colonel,
oh, sorry, I froze it.
what do you think would be the reaction in Moscow or Beijing to an American attack on Tehran?
I think Russia will stand by Iran. They have a mutual defense pact. We don't know the details, all the various codicils and statements in the pact, but I think it's pretty clear that from the Russian standpoint, Iran is is the keystone and the edifice of the region. Remember, we talked previously about this road, which consists of rail lines as well as road that runs from the Indian Ocean coast of Iran straight up through Iran, all the way through the Caucasus and into Russia, that can carry oil, gas, all sorts of things in both directions, and then ultimately reach Europe. And that, again, Iran also sits astride routes between the East and the West. From the Chinese standpoint, Persia was always the key player on the Silk Road. And in fact, once you left Chinese territory, the lingua franca for hundreds of years of that Silk Road was Persian or Farsi, was never Chinese. So I don't see the Russians under any circumstances abandoning Iran. And if we think they will, we're wrong. And again, I think this is one of the reasons that President Trump wanted a rapid conclusion to the war in Ukraine, in the hopes that he could formulate an agreement that would satisfy Russian national security interests and urge the Russians to stay out of any confrontation with Iran. Well, that's obviously failed. While we're doing many good things in Riyadh, and I think the team down there really is negotiating good things with the Russians for the future from the standpoint of the United States, and I would argue Europe, towards normalizing relations.
Right.
The problem is that this war drags on, and we don't seem to understand that this war is not going to end, frankly, until you get rid of Zelensky. He and his cabal and his backers in Western Europe are keeping this thing going.
Okay, so
Don't the Chinese receive a fair amount of oil?
okay, so first, okay, I have to say that I entirely agree with Doug that Russia is going to stand by the Iranians. Just consider, it was 3 days before the inauguration of the president that they concluded this defense treaty with Iran. Now, many people have said the deal is primarily economic. Okay, they don't think it's a tight alliance, which is going to demand the active participation of the Russians in terms of sending soldiers or something like that. But still, the Russians were careful to conclude the agreement before Trump came into office, so as to give him a fait accompli. You know, when he came into the office, he would have that alliance to contend with. I assume Putin knew what he was doing when he constructed that alliance, and that it just wasn't some sort of joke. He knew that was going to commit him to something substantial in case of a U.S. attack on Iran. Now, we don't know what kinds of substantial things that would be, but some possibilities are the S-500 air defense systems. We know the Russians have already shipped S-400 air defense systems. We don't know if those are effective against the B-2 bombers, but we know they're effective against the B-52s, for sure. We also know the S-500s are going to be effective against the B-2 Spirit bombers also. They have really fantastic radars attached to the S-500 systems. Now, we don't know whether the Russians have shipped any of the S-500 systems to the Iranians. But I figure if I am Putin and don't want to have pressure on me to intervene substantially once the war starts, then what I would have done would have been careful to ship some of the S-500 systems to the Iranians so they would be able to defend themselves against the big bombers we have, specifically in Diego Garcia. I would have been directly thinking about that, and I would be thinking, if we give them the means to defend themselves, they'll be able to knock down those bombers, and the pressure on us to actually extend a nuclear umbrella onto Iran will be far less. We can stay in the background. The Iranians will be able to thwart even a major attack from the United States. I would be reasoning that way. Especially, there's a fact about that agreement. We know the agreement committed Iran to continue to operate without having a nuclear weapon. Their having a nuclear weapon is prohibited by that new agreement. So to put that inside of the agreement, I'm sure the Russians had to promise some substantial things to Iran so they would be able to defend themselves against a possible nuclear attack by the United States. And among those things would be S-500 systems, the Su-35 aircraft, which is a rough equivalent to the F-35. Okay, by the way, it operates at Mach 2.2. We know the Iranians have some of those. We know they've been training with some of those. Those are 2.5 times faster than the bombers. So in other words, if there's early detection of the bombers, the Su-35s could intercept them, shoot them down perhaps, with air-to-air missiles before they even get close enough to Iran, to deliver their payload, whether it's conventional or bunker buster, or tactical nuclear weapons, which people have been, talking a lot about. So, I think there have been many ways for the Russians to give support to Iran, even before the current situation of the likelihood of war has come up. And I'm sure the Russians, since they plan for the future and are very careful, have done some things to ensure the capability of Iran to respond to attacks. We don't know exactly what those things are, but I'm afraid we're going to find out in case we do decide to attack Iran. I don't think they're going to be pleasant. In this particular, I have to mention that we have 20 of the B-2 Spirit bombers. That's all. That's the fleet. Only 20 of them. 30% of that fleet, or 7 bombers, have been shifted up, to Diego Garcia and are there now. It won't take much to knock out those 7 bombers if they can be seen by radar. If there are some S-500 systems there, they definitely will be seen. There's even a possibility that the S-400 systems would be able to see those bombers. We'll go into the questions of the speed of those bombers later as we get further into the show. Let me go back to what Doug is saying.
Oil from Iran, and wouldn't they do what they had to prevent that from being interrupted?
Well, they have a flotilla, a naval flotilla. It's not very large,
Okay, he's talking about the Chinese now.
But it is in the Indian Ocean, right at the mouth of the Straits of Hormuz. I don't know the distribution of submarines, but I suspect Russian and Chinese submarines are also in those waters. So yes, the Chinese absolutely oppose any obstruction of access to the Straits of Hormuz. By the way, so do the Koreans and the Japanese and others who depend on that oil and natural gas.
40% of the Chinese oil is said to come from Iran. The last thing the Chinese want is for those shipments to stop. So they would be very much opposed, to the United States attacking Iran. And they probably will do everything they can to ensure that such an attack is not successful. I don't know what they might have given Iran, but there's a possibility they've given Iran some pretty good things to try to thwart an attack, any attack.
I hope that gaggle of people on the text chat about which we spoke earlier in this conversation are intelligent enough to realize the risks of bombing Iran and to inform the president of those risks rather than blithely saying, as they seem to on the chat, with the exception of the vice president, whose hesitance I commend, tell us when you want the bombs to fly. I mean, they have to know what you're talking about. They have to understand the extraordinary risk of just blithely going along with what the Netanyahu regime wants.
Well, you're addressing one problem, which is obviously the powerful influence of Netanyahu, the Israel lobby, on the White House and the Hill. That's clear. Right. There's another problem that is unspoken, but is unavoidable in this discussion, and that is that we tend to treat target sets delivered to us largely by the Air Force as a substitute for strategic planning. In other words, we've forgotten strategy. We've forgotten the questions of purpose, method, end state. We don't go down that road thoroughly enough so that you arrive at a destination that says, if you do X and Y, you have these potential outcomes, and you may not be able to control it. Instead, we look at target sets. Oh, look at the targets that we struck. That was mentioned during the text discussion, where they were celebrating the death of somebody that was supposedly a high-ranking member of the Yemeni or Houthi government. He went into a building to, quote unquote, see his girlfriend, and we destroyed the building. Treating that as a strategic outcome. That's not a strategic outcome. That does not get you somewhere. It does not promote a solution.
That's not a strategic outcome. That's a war crime.
It does not answer the questions of strategic interest. And this is the problem. There are too many people that have been treating target sets. We went through this in Vietnam. We bomb X, Y, and Z, and the enemy will understand. We'll send a message, and we'll bomb here, 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 and the enemy will get it. It doesn't work. It failed in Vietnam. Ultimately, it failed in Iraq, which is why we ended up with this ground invasion, or at least that's an excuse for it. And I don't see much evidence that it's been successful anywhere else. These are not real strategic solutions.
Sounds as though the president has not surrounded himself with people of a sufficient level of intellectual maturity and personal experience to delve into this deadly business of killing people overseas. It certainly the conversation sounded high schoolish to me, but I had a security clearance, but I never participated in a conversation about killing people.
No, I think you're right. And if you go back and read George Kennan's observations and comments on the discussions held in the kitchen cabinet with LBJ about Vietnam, he reached a similar conclusion and ultimately threw up his hands. In other words, it's difficult. It's very difficult for leaders in the United States that are very heavily dependent upon air and naval power to understand that those instrumentalities are not an answer to a strategic dilemma, that there has to be another way, that's why interests have to be understood. It's why we continue to not understand the Russians, because we're not really listening. We're too busy developing messages we want to send to them or messages to Iran. We don't listen. If you don't listen, you don't get any answers. And that's where we are right now. The answer then becomes a target set. Show me the target sets again. I want to make sure one more time. And you watch some a civilian appointee or an Air Force general who is just enthralled with the idea of bombing any opportunity they get and says, oh, well, this target, if we destroy this, that'll bring down the whole regime. If we hit these people here, that will decapitate the regime. How many times have we heard that nonsense? And how often does it fail? Every time.
Colonel McGregor, thank you for your time.
Right. Those last comments were extremely important. Look at how many times the Israelis have tried to decapitate people. It's had the effect of slowing down the resistance from time to time, okay, particularly Hezbollah was slowed down. But Iran keeps on coming. Hezbollah has recently been back. As far as the Hamas leadership is concerned, lots of their important leaders were destroyed, but they're still a factor, and more recruits have joined them. So it doesn't appear that decapitation is very successful. A few years ago in the Trump administration, they decapitated their best thinker when it came to military manners, specifically General Soleimani. And it was a particularly egregious decapitation also. He was on a diplomatic mission to Iraq. It was basically a mission of peace. And we took the opportunity to kill him from the air. Wasn't even a battlefield type of situation. We weren't technically, at war with Iran. That attack was a war crime. He was a hero, to the Iranians. It only strengthened their determination to resist and to build up their capability. So Doug is right. Decapitation does not work. It has never worked in all the wars we've been in since the Vietnam War. So I think Doug said some very important things there. I'm going to go to some of your comments now, and then we're going to get into some more of the nitty-gritty of possible war with Iran. So here we are with your comments. I see your mic is off, Dee.
Yes, there was a lot of barking here, so
I'm sure, yeah.
so I make sure I turn it off.
Evelina says, has anyone considered it might have been on purpose? Steve says, Doc, I'm going to send you some information about China's population disappearing. Thank you, Steve. Evelina says, willful negligence. Yes. Yeah, we've considered that it might have been on purpose. There's a whole theory about that I think we're going to get later from Larry Johnson. That might have been on purpose. And specifically, it might have been on purpose to try to pull the United States into a war with Iran, to justify why they were bombing a residential building. Okay, so killing 100 people, okay, in that building, was worth doing just to get one guy who was seeing his girlfriend. Okay, if he even was seeing his girlfriend, if he even was in that building. And as Evelyn says, and lying about it being a military target. Yeah. Evelyn says Putin will stand by Iran, like Colonel McGregor said. I think Trump wants to deal with both. Zelensky is complicating Trump's deal with Russia by bombing a Russian electric facility yesterday, I believe. Yes, absolutely. And Evelina points out that Zelensky is getting in Trump's way. Absolutely is getting in Trump's way. Absolutely, he has to go. Okay. So let's get on to the article. And I'll share that, but it's going to be Dee's turn.
Okay.
So that article, okay, is by Mike Whitney.
Okay.
And it's about the movement of the bombers into position. Their transport to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean.
Okay.
Okay, let me get to the top of this article. It's fairly lengthy with a lot
Yes, I see.
of interesting quotes. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Mike Whitney, March 29th, 2025. Trump moves nuclear capable bombers to within striking distance of Iran.
Yes, they're within the striking distance of the bombers.
Hmm.
The question is, whether the Iranians have any capability to strike back at the base.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't know about that. Well, here's a striking photo.
Mm-hmm. A war with Iran would be 10 to 15 times worse than the Iraq War in terms of casualties and costs. And we would lose. We would undoubtedly lose. Retired Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson.
Okay, if it's 10 times worse in terms of cost, the cost of a war with Iran would be $20 trillion. Just want to keep that in mind. It would actually swallow up the budget of the United States. Okay, Dee, please keep going.
There has been much discussion about the relocation of B-2 bombers to Diego Garcia in anticipation of a potential conflict with Iran. However, the B-2 excels primarily against small, unsophisticated, and impoverished nations equipped with outdated air defense systems. In short, the B-2 is a sophisticated tool for intimidating weaker adversaries, but is largely ineffective against modern integrated air defense systems. Mike Mihailovic. Recent reports and satellite imagery indicate a significant buildup of U.S. military assets at Diego Garcia, a strategic base in the Indian Ocean. The Pentagon has deployed 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers capable of carrying nuclear payloads, numerous C-17 transport planes, 10 KC-135 refueling tankers, an Ohio classic ballistic missile submarine, and 2 carrier groups to locations where they can be used in a preemptive attack on Iran. The unprecedented buildup coincides with recent threats by President Donald J. Trump regarding Iran's nuclear enrichment program. On Friday, Trump delivered another ominous warning to Iran
Okay,
during a briefing at the White House.
before we get to the warning, let us simply note that it's already been pointed out, okay, that the B-2 bombers may not be very capable. In other words, it says above that they have capabilities, okay, in the area for intimidating weaker adversaries, but they're largely effective against a modern integrated type of air defense system. I'm not entirely sure about that. As I said earlier, it's debatable whether the S-400s, okay, are able to detect them. But I don't think it's debatable that the S-500 systems, okay, are able to detect them. We don't know exactly what the Iranian capabilities are. We know they have the S-400 systems, okay, because when on October 26th, the Israelis made an attempt at attacking Iran. And by the way, we know that attack was very unsuccessful. Okay, without even reaching Iranian airspace, they turned around and went back to Israel because they detected some things in the air defense system they had never seen before. What I've heard about that is that what they detected was new S-400 systems. Okay, so the F-35s and F-22s and the F-16s and 15s on that attack became afraid of the S-400 systems. And they fired some ordnance at some distance, but they never reached the airspace of Iran. Okay. If the Russians have shipped any of the S-500s, to the Iranians, they would be that much more capable. Okay, now they mention here the transport planes, and the refueling tankers. Those would be important for taking care of the jets that might be taking off from Israel, or carriers, okay, and that had to go a considerable distance, over to Iran. The refueling tankers are very important for that sort of thing. And the Ohio class ballistic missile submarine, that could turn out to be the biggest of threats actually to Iran, because those particular submarines can fire nuclear weapons, and they might be hard to detect. Okay, I don't know if they would get into the straits, but they don't have to get into the straits. They can stand offshore from locations in the Indian Ocean. And it might be hard for the Iranians to knock down the intermediate range types of missiles that they have there. So that may be the biggest of threats. It may not be the B-52 or the B-2 stealth bombers at all. It might turn out that the toughest thing to counter for the Iranians may be the missiles coming from the submarine. I think the Ohio class is a Trident submarine, but I'm not sure about that. It's certainly a nuclear submarine. Okay, please go on, Dee.
Okay. Iran is very high on my list of things to watch. We have to talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran. My big preference is that we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
Okay, so that's the bluster of Donald Trump.
Yes.
He blusters very frequently. He's doing it there. There's a likelihood very, very bad things are going to happen to our military forces if we attempt an attack on Iran.
Mm-hmm.
The carrier groups are likely to be sitting ducks for the Iranian missiles. They have no defense against hypersonic missiles. They're on a surface, so they are going to be vulnerable. And the ships inside of the carrier groups, are going to be vulnerable as well. And all of our air bases in the area surrounding Iran are going to be vulnerable to the hypersonic missiles that they are able to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Please go on.
The increase in warnings along with the deployment of B-2 bombers has caused a stir among analysts, many of who now believe that Trump is planning to target Iran's nuclear facilities with, quote, low-yield nuclear bunker buster bombs that are designed to penetrate and destroy underground fortified facilities.
Okay, let me comment here as well. If they're primarily using the B-2 bombers and the B-52 bombers to go after the Iranian sites with the bunker buster bombs, whether nuclear or non-nuclear bunker buster bombs, then they're going to have to contend with the fact that those bombers are slow. Their top speeds are about 650 miles per hour, which is about 1,000 kilometers, maybe a little more than 1,000 kilometers, 1,050 kilometers, 1,010 kilometers. Since they are going to have to travel, target Iran's nuclear, right? Okay, since that's their speed, it's going to take them a long time to actually get to Iran. Consider the top speed of the B-52 is 650 miles per hour. I'm sorry, the top speed of the B-52. The top speed of the B-2 is even less, 630 miles per hour. If you're looking at kilometers per hour, the B-2 is 1010, and the B-52 is roughly 1050. If they all go together, figuring there's safety in numbers, it's going to take them 3.7 hours from Diego Garcia to Iran. Okay, if the Russians are looking at this through satellites, they may be able to attack to detect the start of the attack. And the Iranians will have 3.7 hours to answer the attack.
Stop it, Colby.
Okay, because it's fairly obvious the Russian satellites, especially if they're watching, Diego Garcia, which they probably will do now, they'll probably detect it when the attack starts, and they'll be able to warn the Iranians 3.7 hours before they get to Iran. That's enough time for the air defense systems to detect the B-52s and B-2s. That's enough time for the fighter jets to get there to attack them. That's enough time for the air-to-air missiles to get to them to attack them. It's enough time for the ground-to-air missiles to attack them. The Iranians have hypersonic missiles that can be used to attack in the air as well. They have air-to-air missiles. So those B-52s and B-2s, if you assume they're carrying the payloads for the bunker busters, they're going to be vulnerable to attack. And there's going to be considerable period of time when, they're going to be under attack. They would probably be under attack actually an hour before they get to Iran. There are only 7 of the B-2s. There's a very good chance all of the B-2s would be knocked out and would never get there. Now, there'll be many more of the B-52s. I don't know how many, but 40 or 50 or 60 B-52s. But the Iranians have the rockets to, knock them out too. I don't think we know how many of the B-52s are likely to get through. I personally think it's unlikely any of the B-2s are going to get through. I don't know whether our war planners have really considered this. I think they've been thinking that the Iranians don't have air defenses to the B-52s and B-2s. I think that's very unlikely. Very, very unlikely. I think they will be able to defend against them much better than they can defend against any missiles we might fire. But if those big payloads to get to the underground missile cities of Iran are being carried by the B-52s and B-2s, I have to say, I don't think any of them are going to get through. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's a good possibility none of them are going to get through because they have to come from such a long way, and it's going to take such a long time, for them to get there. Okay, now I wonder whether any of the fighter jets that we're going to send over are going to be carrying those bombs. The word we've heard is that if there are nuclear weapons that are going to be used, tactical nuclear weapons, they're going to be carried by the B-52s and B-2s. So if that's what happens, what I'm saying is that it's nice to have those weapons, but if you can't get them to the targets, it's not going to make any difference. Okay. Now, maybe some of those weapons can be carried by the F-22s, the F-35s, the F-18s, or the F-16s or 15s. Maybe especially the F-22s. And the F-15s can carry some heavy stuff. But I think the S-400s, and if there's S-500 air defense systems, I think they're going to take care of most of the jets. As I said, they didn't get to Iranian airspace before. I don't know how many of them are going to get, to Iranian airspace. Now, if you point out to me that the carrier groups are going to be very close, to Iranian airspace, I grant that point, but the carrier groups are going to be very vulnerable to the Iranian hypersonic missiles and might be attacked and knocked out before they even launch too many planes. Anyway, I foresee at least a very chaotic situation.
Mm.
And I don't see that situation going according to our war plans. There are too many imponderables here that we don't, really know about. But let's get back to Mike's articles and see what, he has to say about that.
Okay. Okay. If that action were to take place, Iran would be forced, excuse me, to launch massive retaliatory attacks on U.S. and Israeli bases, naval assets, critical infrastructure, and oil facilities across the Middle East. And if those attacks were able to inflict significant damage on U.S. or Israeli targets, then we could see a rapid escalation to a nuclear war, a
Okay.
scenario that seems more likely now than ever before.
Right. Okay. So I agree with the danger of that, but I also have to point out that this may not take the form of Iran making, massive kinds of retaliatory attacks. This may be a situation where the attacks by the Americans are detected before they deliver their payloads.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, if there's advance warning to the Iranians, they're going to fire the hypersonic missiles. And those are going to be directed at the Israeli bases, the naval assets, also the critical infrastructure and the oil facilities across the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
The so-called the retaliatory attacks may actually get there before the American bombers and the Israeli fighters. Okay, so I'd add that.
Okay.
Okay, so now to the quote from Scott Ritter.
7 B-2 bombers have been deployed from Whitman Air Force Base in the United States to Diego Garcia. This is an unprecedented deployment, and they are matched with 10 KC-31 tankers. That's what's needed to launch an attack against a target like Iran. This is something that should wake people up because there is real potential for conflict.
Okay, so here I have to say something also. The distance, once again, is 4,842 kilometers from the base in Diego Garcia
Mhm.
to get to Iran. Okay, I think the range of these bombers, the B-52s and the B-2s,
Mhm.
okay, are actually greater than that. I don't even know if they're going to have to resort to refueling from the tankers. I think any fighter jets we sent over are going to have to get a refueling, before they can get back to base. But I'm not sure the bombers, have to be refueled. Okay, so I raised that question.
Mhm.
Okay.
The fact is, there are B-2 bombers, there are Ohio-class submarines, there are nuclear weapons attached to each of these weapon systems. Nuclear weapons that have been built for the sole purpose of attacking targets like these that exist in Iran. I'm simply stating the fact that the Trump administration has a nuclear posture attached to a nuclear employment plan that will use nuclear weapons in a conflict against Iran. And we can't pretend that that doesn't exist. Scott Ritter.
I think he's right about that. We can't pretend, that doesn't exist. Now, he seems to think there's more than one submarine coming into the fray. All we've heard about is that one of the submarines went up to Diego Garcia. Of course, that can launch lots and lots of missiles. So one could be enough and, would certainly be very dangerous. But I'm not sure, there are many of those submarines that are going to be in the area. Please go on.
Okay. We already said what his babble was before, so I don't think I have to repeat his babble. It's worth noting that the Trump administration is on the verge of launching a war on a country that possesses no national security threat to the United States, nor does it threaten U.S. interests in the region. Iran's only crime is that it occupies a piece of real estate in a region where Israel is determined to be the dominant power. That means Iran's military capability must be significantly diminished by Israel's favorite pit bull, the United States. To that end, wealthy Zionists filled Trump's campaign coffers during the last presidential election, knowing that Trump's vast popularity would be useful in advancing the Israeli agenda. The primary goal of that agenda has always been the obliteration of Iran's military capability so that Israel can emerge as a regional hegemon unopposed. Trump is merely playing the role for which he was chosen. Here's more from Ritter. Scott Ritter. When Trump was president last time, 2016, he redid the nuclear posture review and the nuclear employment guidance. And the nuclear employment guidance is the war plan. The war plan was rewritten so he could launch nuclear strikes on Iran. So we're ready to launch strikes on Iran today. The plan was implemented. We have the weapons. We've identified the targets. Question: what was rewritten? Scott Ritter, you need specific weapons types. We do now have a new nuclear, quote, low yield bunker busting bomb that will penetrate and destroy the facility with minimal fallout. We have similar nukes on Trident submarines in the region that can be used in a decapitation strike on Iran. We are ready to go to war against Iran. We have already made that decision. The plan exists. Question: so what you're telling me is that if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, Scott Ritter, we will strike and they will be annihilated. They'll never know what hit them, and they'll never recover from it. The American plan will not kill tens of millions of Iranians, but it will kill tens of thousands of Iranians, destroy the nuclear infrastructure, and set Iran back forever. The alternative for Iran is to negotiate away their nuclear program.
Okay, I have to kind of disagree with that. The reason why I disagree are twofold. First of all, if Iran were to negotiate away its nuclear program, that is no guarantee that as soon as they do, they won't be confronted by the same attack. Okay, in other words, we know our intelligence assessment is telling us that they don't have a bomb now, and yet we're preparing to attack them. So if they were to develop a bomb and we threatened them in the same way, and they negotiated away their bomb and their program, that's no guarantee that we're not going to attack them. In other words, we are not agreement capable. We have been showing for years we are not agreement capable. We do not stick with agreements.
No, we don't.
Furthermore, the Iranians have another alternative. And the other alternative is them to attack, but first. If they were to suddenly attack, say in the next week before we start up anything, they have the capability to create complete chaos in Israel and in all our bases around the area. That's going to create chaos for any war plan that we might have.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said before, they do have the capability to counter the B-2s and the B-52s. So at the end of various exchanges, then we may end up with the Trident submarines to counter. And we may be able to counter those too, because the nukes on those submarines are not on missiles that are hypersonic. So the Iranians, it's questionable whether even the Trident submarine, since there's only one Ohio class, I think there's a question about even whether that is going to get through. But if I'm Iran, and I'm worried that we're going to strike with all this capability, it seems to me it would make sense for them to take a chance and to strike first and to take away a lot of our capability before we strike.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure I agree with Scott. I'm sure he would have a very good return for that, though. Scott is quite brilliant in my view, and I think that he's, when he pronounces on things like this, he's mostly right.
Mm-hmm.
Please go on.
Alrighty, 1 second. I just have to see something here.
Trump wanted peace. Like, what if he said he didn't want it?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. We'll consider.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
be
him wanting
in the program
peace.
too. That's going to be in the program too.
Okay. This is why Ritter is so worried. He seriously believes that Trump is planning to preemptively attack Iran's nuclear sites, which would set the dominoes in motion, triggering a nuclear war. To me, this seems like a reasonable concern, but surprisingly, Ritter's analysis has ignited a firestorm among a number of his supporters online who have overnight turned into some of the most vicious critics.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
unfortunate because Scott is a person of goodwill,
Yes.
very brilliant in terms of of his analyses. There should be civilized conversation with him.
Hmm.
But anyway,
Here we go, the short clips from X. Scott, let me tell you plainly, if the U.S. uses nuclear weapons against Iran, even quote tactical ones, the spell breaks forever. The myth of Western restraint dies in the open. The lies of rules-based order evaporates in radioactive dust. China won't wait to be next. Russia will tighten its alliance with Tehran. The global south will turn its back for good, and every nation not under Washington's boot, will know the truth. If you don't arm yourself, you will be annihilated. That's not proliferation, that's inevitability. You say, quote, only one nation walks away. No, Scott, no one walks away from nuclear war. Not cleanly, not economically, not morally. But let's entertain your scenario. Iran is wiped out. Oil hits 500 a barrel. The Straits of Hormuz is a graveyard. The global economy implodes. Not just Europe and Asia, but the dollar itself. Because trust dies when empire burns its last moral pretense. And here's the part your Pentagon fantasies never compute. It's not just bombs that bring nations to their knees, it's legitimacy. Once lost, never regained. And the US, already staggering from endless wars, it won't rise from the ashes of another charred country. It'll sink into them. You claim you, quote, assess the world as it is? Then look again. The American empire is not ascending. It's cornered, it's flailing, it's threatening annihilation, not out of strength, but fear. Fear that the world is dominated is slipping away. Fear that Iran refuses to kneel, and fear that history, which you once claimed would hold America accountable, is no longer on your side. So, keep listing your bombers, your submarines, your low-yield fantasies, because beneath all that steel and strategy lies a single truth. You've already lost the moral war. And when that goes, everything else follows. Sunny Thang.
I think that response is a very, very compelling response.
Yes.
Okay, I certainly like that response, but I don't know whether things will get to that. And the reason why I don't know is because I uh, um, uh, 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 I doubt that the nuclear attack by the United States is going to be very successful. For the reasons
Mm-hmm.
I gave earlier. Uh, I don't know whether any of the B-2s or B-52s are going to get through. I don't think the fighter attacks are going to be successful. Uh, I think the capability of Iran to retaliate with missiles,
Mm-hmm.
or to fire the missiles before the American attack actually gets there. I think there's considerable capability for that. I also think there's one thing that Scott has not considered here,
Mm-hmm.
and that is that even though, of course, the Russians want to keep the nuclear weapons away from the Iranians, do they feel the same way about keeping uh, keeping the Oreshniks away from the Ukrainians? Or would they, as part of the game of strengthening the Iranians, would they give them some of the Oreshniks to use on Israel in case of any crisis? In case of a full-scale attack, how about an Iranian retaliation completely knocking out the capability of the Israelis to wage war anytime soon? Probably 5 or 6 Oreshniks would do that. And you wouldn't even have to use any nuclear weapons on Israel. What makes Scott think that there haven't been some of the Oreshniks actually transferred over to Iran for their use in case they get attacked? If I were Putin, I would probably have done that already. So I'm not sure only one nation actually walks away. Of course, the United States can walk away, in the sense that the Iranians don't have any capability to directly attack the United States, and the Russians probably won't want to escalate to that extent. But still, if all our capability inside of West Asia is destroyed as a result of that exchange, then that's not exactly walking away. And in the kind of exchange we're talking about, that could be the result. We could lose 3 carriers, very easily lose 3 carriers and a lot of the groups surrounding them. We could lose all the bases we have surrounding Iran. And we could lose Israel because of the factors, that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a nuclear weapon or 2 gets through. But that's probably all that would get through anyway. So Iran would still be largely intact, and their underground capabilities would still be very, very strong. And Israel would be destroyed in the kind of scenario that I'm foreshadowing here. Anyway, I'd like to see what the counter arguments of Scott would be to the kind of scenario that I'm talking about. I wonder if he's thought of that. Okay, but anyway, having said that, I do agree that if the attacks go as far as Sony Thang is assuming, that he's right about the consequences of a nuclear attack on Iran. I think that argument is very convincing. I'm
Yes.
just saying that it's not going to happen because the Iranians are going to largely defeat, a nuclear attack.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do defeat it, that's going to discourage other people, from using nuclear attack in a similar situation. So there's that. Okay, please go on with the article.
The overall thrust of these critiques is a tacit objection to any more by Iran to compromise or negotiate with the Trump administration. This is generally perceived as, quote, caving in to the evil empire, which in many respects is true. It's worth noting that Iran is not currently in violation of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, nor has it been in the past. In fact, Iran has willingly complied with numerous additional protocols and confidence-building measures that were never imposed on any other country, all aimed at allaying fears that it was secretly developing nuclear weapons. But as Tulsi Gabbard confirmed recently, and former CIA Director William Burns before her, Iran does not have nukes, is not building nukes, and has not broken its agreement under the NPT. The whole matter is a mendacious confection concocted by powerful Zionists and their media collaborators who want to destroy Iran in order for Israel to become the dominant power in the Middle East.
I certainly strongly agree with that.
I do too. It makes sense.
It certainly does.
It's also worth noting the dishonest way this crisis has been presented to the American people. The public has been led to believe that Trump is trying to prevent nuclear proliferation, when, in fact, the administration is demanding that Iran abandon its ballistic missile program as well. On March 23, 2025, on Face the Nation, Trump advisor Mike Waltz stated bluntly that Trump's demands include the dismantling of Iran's, quote, strategic missile program. But Iran's ballistic missiles do not violate any international law, nor are they banned under any treaty obligation. Trump is simply ordering Iran to surrender the means by which it defends itself or face military action by the U.S. Is that a reasonable demand? No. It says here, no. It's national suicide. And once again, the origin of the insanity is Benjamin Netanyahu, excuse me, who has consistently urged the U.S. to take stronger action against Iran's missile capabilities. Israel's agents in Congress introduced the Missiles Act in July 2023 to codify U.S. sanctions on Iran's missile and drone program, citing Israel's security. At the same time, Trump's, quote, maximum pressure campaign has included, quote, missile-related entities credited to Netanyahu's input. In short, Iran is being asked to willingly disarm itself so Israel can do to Iran what it is currently doing to Syria and Lebanon. Why would they do that? They won't. They will open back-channel communications with Trump's envoys and continue to comply with their treaty obligations, but eventually Trump will order airstrikes on nuclear targets in Iran, signaling the beginning of the war. And that will pit America's out-of-date weapons cache up against Iran's state-of-the-art ballistic missile systems that will, as Will Shriver opines, expose American weakness, not reinforce the widespread mythology of untouchable American strengths.
Yes, I have to add to that. If there is a nuclear attack that we're scenarioing here, and most of the nuclear weapons do not get through, if the bombers are defeated, if some of the missiles from the submarines are knocked down, if the fighters are destroyed, okay, and turned aside, if the bases are destroyed, that's going to expose American weakness. It's going to expose how the Americans can be beaten by the kind of technology the Iranians have. Mm-hmm. We haven't even begun to talk here about the drones. I mean, their capability for drone warfare, which can be deadly for the naval carriers, for the ships. Those drones can knock out ships. They can cripple carriers. And we're not even talking about hypersonic missiles yet. Except I said earlier that hypersonic missiles could take out the carriers, which they certainly can do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The reasons for this are very easy to understand. Following last year's tit-for-tat missile attacks between Israel and Iran, a fantastical narrative emerged that Israeli airstrikes on Iran were successful, while Iranian missile attacks on Israel failed to do any significant damage. But nothing could be further from the truth. Israel's air campaign was sharply rebuffed by Iran's advanced multi-layered air defense systems, while the vast majority of Iran's long-range hypersonic ballistic missiles cut through Israel's vaulted air defense systems, striking targets without interference. How do we draw these unusual conclusions? By checking the documented accounts of what actually took place. For example, consider this early account of Israel's October 26th attack by former intelligence officer Alastair de Crook. Question.
Yes, Alastair was both an intelligence officer and a diplomat as well.
Mm-hmm. Did Israel cause any meaningful damage to Iran in its attack on October 26th? Alistair Crook. No. But something significant did happen because the attack was supposed to lead off with the destruction of the air defense systems, what they called SEAD, Suppression of Enemy Air Defense. The aircraft was supposed to destroy the air defenses in Iraq, Syria, and Iran, so the second and third wave would come in and with the conventional weapons to destroy the targets that had been selected for them. But the second and third wave could only enter Iranian airspace if it was safe for them to do that, if the air defenses had been properly suppressed. Now what happened, although we don't know precisely, is that those second and third waves never happened. We got into the first wave and the Israelis said, that's it, we're finished, it's over, we won and it's a great success. What seems to have happened is that the Israeli aircraft with their low-range missiles to destroy the air defense systems never got closer than 70 kilometers to Iran. Too far for their missiles to lock on to the air defenses because they needed the signals to lock onto. The key thing, they said, and this is from Israeli sources, quote, we've discovered an unknown air defense system over Tehran province. So,
We think the unknown air defense systems were S-400s that had recently been shipped to Iran. The Israelis were not expecting there to be S-400 systems.
mhm.
That's a guess, though. Maybe they were S-500 systems. I don't really know.
So, what seems to have happened is that the Israeli aircraft, were being locked onto by another air defense system, so they were frightened to go ahead and they scrapped the attack. They then simply released their long-range missiles. Most of these missiles are guided by GPS, and the Russians are highly adept at jamming GPS. But this unexplained air defense system was possibly a Russian air defense system that can attack stealth fighters like the F-35s. If you have a missile that has a radar capacity that is able to identify a stealth fighter, then the whole idea of the attack on Iran seems to have collapsed. Yep. All the conventional bombers carrying conventional weapons won't go into the area because it was too dangerous. It was not a secure area. The airspace was dominated by air defense that threatened the stealth fighters themselves. This has huge geostrategic implications if this is what what in fact happened. You see, there was a three-phase plan, and when the plan was scoopered, they just announced the plan as if it had happened. Quote, we've succeeded, we flew over Tehran, we suppressed the air defenses, we bombed targets, and we destroyed the missile capacity. It's just hype. It's not true. Judging Freedom, Alistair Crook, YouTube. Keep in mind, Crook's account is just one of many accounts that relay the same basic facts and draw the same basic conclusions. And those conclusions, as we've stated earlier, are linked to, quote, Iran's advanced multi-layered air defense system that can counter any potential Israeli attack on the homeland. In short, there is no evidence that either Israel or the United States have the ability to effectively penetrate Iran's air defense system and destroy the targets they need to obliterate to win the war. What's more interesting is the fact that Israel has apparently kept this information from Trump and his advisors, who are stumbling blindly into a disaster. I have seen nothing that would convince me that Hegseth, Waltz, or Rubio have a clear understanding of what transpired in the clashes between Israel and Iran. They are operating on the theory that Israel is telling them the truth. And that's their first mistake.
And maybe their last.
Yeah. In contrast, Iran's attack on Israel was a rousing success which is to say that their cutting-edge ballistic missiles completely eluded Israel's air defense systems, hitting some of the most heavily defended targets in the world. This is from a post by the armchair warlord. The Iranian strike on Nevatim and Tel and of airfields in Israel on Tuesday completely validated my analysis from April. In April, the Iranians demonstrated they could defeat Israel's BMD system at will and strike precision targets. This time they did damage. Video of the engagement suggests that the vast majority of the Iranian salvo, probably more than 80%, penetrated and struck targets in Israel. The Iranians can be expected to have damaged aircraft, infrastructure, SAM systems, and AD radars at both airfields, as well as hitting several other targets elsewhere in the country less intensively. The effectiveness of the strike can be seen by simply observing the Israeli reaction. Rather than immediate counterattack, they have withdrawn for deliberation, with some talk of a de-escalatory downward step retaliation against the Houthis or Hezbollah. The reason for this is simple. The Iranians have now demonstrated the ability to overwhelm the Israeli AD system at will and precisely strike targets, and with their missile shield ineffective, and Israeli leadership is coming to terms with the fact that they run a small and isolated country with a limited amount of critical infrastructure. At this point, the Ayatollah can push a button and turn the lights out in Israel, and no amount of American money can prevent that. The armchair warlord. And although the MSM has tried to sugarcoat Iran's October 1 attack and make it look like a big nothing burger, some of the mainstream publications have accurately recorded what took place on October 1. This is from the article at The Guardian titled, "Escalation with Iran Could Be Risky. Israel is more vulnerable than it seems." Satellite and social media footage has shown missile after missile striking Nevatim Air Base in the Negev Desert and setting off at least some secondary explosions, indicating that despite the highly touted effectiveness of Israel's Iron Dome and Arrow's air defense, Iran's strikes were more effective than they had been previously admitted. Experts who analyzed the footage noted at least 32 direct hits on the airbase. None appeared to have caused major damage, but some landed close enough to hangars that house Israel's F-35 jets, among the country's most prized military assets. Quote, "The core facts remain that Iran has proven it can hit Israel hard if it so chooses," writes Decker Eveleth, an analyst with the research and analysis group CNA, who analyzes satellite images for a blog's post. Quote, "Air bases are hard targets, and the sort of target that likely won't produce many casualties. Iran could choose a different target, say, a densely packed IDF ground force base, or a target within a civilian area, and a missile strike there would produce a large number of casualties."
Right, such as the settler targets,
Yeah.
bank, could be devastating.
In the attack, Bayaz said Iran had, quote, "used their most advanced weapons, and they have sufficient stockpile of being able to do that for months. That would be the world we'll be living in unless somebody pulls the plug on this cycle of escalation. Escalation with Iran could be risky. Israel is more vulnerable than it seems. The Guardian.
Yes.
Thinking about that for a moment, Iranian ballistic missiles landed 32 direct hits on the Nevatim air base, the most heavily defended air base on the planet. The Iranians have shown that they can put their missiles on any target in any location in Israel, and Israel has no way to stop them. What does it all mean? It means that Israel is luring the United States into a war that it cannot win and that will bring the American century to a catastrophic end.
And the graphic just below is a graphic to illustrate the dozens and dozens of missiles that can be fired out of one of the underground cities of Iran.
Mm.
And that's the final thing of that article.
You know, it's just so stupid. And I know I've said this before, with the U.S. just looking at one side of an issue, one
Yes.
perspective. You look at only the Israel perspective instead of looking at the other perspectives as well.
Yes, I completely agree. I completely agree. Let's get to some of the comments here. Evelina asked, does anyone live on that island aside from the military personnel? I don't know. I know there are UK military personnel on that island and not just American personnel. Okay, I don't know how populated it is other than that. Sandy Degg has arrived and says hello, and she has shared. And we do have 56 people attending the stream, which is good for us.
That's good. Hello, Sandy. Thank you for sharing.
At this point. But that's those are the only few comments we have on that very good piece that we just went through. Which means we can get to the next piece, which is a far shorter piece, but also very good. And it's from Larry Johnson. And I'm going to take on that one. Okay, it's from Larry Johnson's own blog, which is Sonar 21. And the title of this is called Larry Squared. Putin is unyielding and Yemen holds firm. This is from 28th of March, 2025 by Larry C. Johnson. And you see an interesting photo to begin the blog. If I can begin to get, there it is. Scroll down. There is a B-52 on that tropical island, vegetation being tropical. A gigantic B-52. And right near it is the B-2 bomber. And you can see the B-2 bomber is, if you take everything into account, it must be less than 1/3 the size of the B-52.
Right.
And yet it's big enough to handle payloads that are very heavy. It is said that the profile of the B-2 because of its stealth characteristics, when it's looked at by radar, that it looks like a bird. And so that's why it's supposedly very hard to detect. Anyway, you can see it's far smaller than the B-52s, which are rather easy to detect. Okay, I hadn't realized that the top speed of the two planes is about the same. I somehow thought that the B-2 would be a supersonic bomber. But it's not a supersonic bomber. It's just a subsonic bomber. That is significant when we consider how many hours it would take to get to Iran. And as I pointed out earlier, it would take about 3.7 hours. Quite enough time for long advance warning to the Iranians. It was a busy podcast day for me, says Larry. What a day. I started at 10:15 with the judge on his Newsmax channel. After finishing with the judge, I did a 10:30 hit with Nima and Colonel Wilkerson. At 13:30 hours, I was with Danny Haifong and Colonel Wilkerson again. At 1500 hours with Randy Credico. 1600 hours with the judge and Ray McGovern, that is. And 1800 hours with George Papadopoulos and his wife. The videos with Nima, Danny Haifong, and the judge roundtable are posted below if you're interested. Then Larry says, Trump's effort to negotiate a quick end to the war in Ukraine has stalled, in large measure because Zelensky and his crew reject the agreement the U.S. reached with Russia in Riyadh on Monday. And because the Europeans refused to lift sanctions on Russian grain and fertilizer exports. There really is no mystery here. Putin is not playing games, nor is he stalling for time. He believes that despite some progress in establishing a dialogue with Trump and his administration, major obstacles remain in the West that will prevent a return to normal, i.e., regular diplomatic relations and relief from sanctions. Last week, during a closed-door session at the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, RSPP Congress, Putin delivered a sobering message to Russian business leaders regarding sanctions and the war in Ukraine. He warned them not to expect a quick resolution to the conflict or a rapid lifting of Western sanctions. Putin emphasized that even if sanctions were eased, the West would likely find alternative ways to exert pressure on Russia. He described sanctions as a mechanism of systematic strategic pressure rather than temporary measures. Putin reiterated that there is no hope for a full return to free trade, unrestricted capital flows, or reliance on Western mechanisms for protecting investor rights. He also criticized Western companies that left Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, stating they would face significant barriers if they attempted to return. In other words, Putin ain't wearing rose-colored glasses and remains wary of Western intentions. During an inspection of the Russian port of Murmansk, which serves its Arctic fleet, Putin made the following remarks about the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin did not mince words. Speaking from the deck of the Archangelsk, a fourth-generation nuclear-armed submarine with Zircon hypersonic missiles, which are among the fastest the Russians have, by the way. The Russian president declared what many have long seen. The Ukrainian military propped up, coming up by Western fantasy and NATO cash, is running out of road. Quote, not long ago I said, quote, we'll squeeze them, unquote. Now there's reason to believe we'll finish them off, unquote. But Putin told naval officers standing on steel that echoes with centuries of Russian resilience. He reminded the world of the West's serial betrayals, first with the Minsk Agreement, then the Istanbul talks in 2022. In both cases, Russia negotiated in good faith, and in both cases, Western capitals, particularly London, sabotaged the process. Quote, the European handlers convinced the Ukrainian leadership they had to continue armed resistance essentially to the last Ukrainian, unquote. Putin said, a line that lands like an indictment should at The Hague if it functioned as intended, unquote. While at Murmansk, Putin also proposed a solution to fix Ukraine's illegitimate government. He called for creating interim government in Ukraine under the supervision of the UN and select neutral countries to hold elections. This is simply a reiteration of one of the key conditions that Putin elucidated in his June 2024 speech to senior diplomats at the Russian Foreign Ministry. Ukraine's sovereignty will be rebuilt, not destroyed, but it will be reconstructed on foundations of neutrality, not, NATO weaponization, and will prohibit the neo-Nazis from taking power. While these statements do not reflect new proposals or a shift in Russia's stated objectives, Putin has introduced Novorossiya into the equation. Novorossiya encompasses all of eastern and the southern parts of Ukraine, including regions like Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and the Oblast, Mykolaiv. February 27, 2025, Putin stated Russia would escalate Federal Security Service, FSB, activities in Donbass and Novorossiya, signaling a shift from the terms proposed in June 2024. His spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, reinforced that Donbass and Novorossiya are considered integral parts of Russia. March 19, 2025, Putin claimed Novorossiya is a Russian entity during an address to the Prosecutor General's Office Board. He also referred to Odessa as a, quote, Russian city, unquote, which, by the way, it is and has been since the days of Catherine the Great, who was responsible for the building of Odessa in the first place. Further underscoring, he will expand territorial claims if Kyiv does not accept the deal on the table. For those who don't know, the Russian city of Odessa was built in 1776. It goes back that far. It's the same age as the United States, but it's still referred to as part of Novorossiya, which is New Russia, because all these territories were added to Russia in 1776. March 28, 2025, during a meeting with servicemen, Putin highlighted Russian advances in Donbass and Novorossiya, claiming that 99% of the Luhansk People's Republic, LPR, and over 70% of the Donetsk People's Republic, DPR, have been, quote, liberated, unquote. He asserted that the strategic initiative lies entirely with Russian forces. Iran, or rather Trump's threat to attack Iran, is the wild card that could derail efforts to restore normal relations with Russia. Iran has rejected Trump's offer to open talks in exchange for Iran ending all support to the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Yes, that was a stupid thing for Trump to ask for. It wasn't a serious thing to open up any talks with. It was just incompetent that they would do that. According, to El Mayadeen and other informed sources, the Iranians' response included the following points. Iran reaffirms that it's not going to negotiate directly with the United States, especially under the policy of maximum pressure, and it rejects the American approach categorically. 2, Iran states it's not going to negotiate on behalf of any regional power, and that Iran does not dictate the foreign policy of other nations or groups, including Yemen's Ansarallah, in other words, the Houthis, which is an independent ally. Iran states it will not accept Trump's unrealistic conditions, quote unquote, that the U.S. demands were so extensive they cannot be entertained even hypothetically. 4, Iran warns unequivocally that any military or hostile action by the United States or any of its, quote, stooges, unquote, will be met with an Iranian response that will encompass all U.S. military assets in the Middle East, or what I've been referring to as West Asia, because I think that's a more accurate term. Prior to receiving the Iranian response, Trump ordered a carrier strike group and B-2 bombers to Diego Garcia. As of March 28th, Diego Garcia is hosting 5 B-2 stealth bombers and 2 additional arrivals expected. These strategic bombers join 2 B-52s, which deployed there a year ago. I guess that I'm assuming there were many more B-52s than that. If there are only 2 B-52s which are going to engage in this attack, if there is one, I think then it will be even easier for the Iranians to turn aside a bomber attack from 7 of the stealth bombers and 2 of the B-52s. I mean, they'll never get there. They're going to be knocked down by the air-to-air missiles, because the warning of their arrival is going to be much too long, and they'll be subject to attacks very quickly, long before they get to the airspace of Iran. Some analysts, like my good friends, Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson, believe that this is part of the negotiating strategy of Trump, i.e. a show of force designed to pressure Iran to accept a deal. I am less sanguine. I believe that Trump has been convinced, wrongly in my opinion, that Iran has no credible air defense, that a strategic bombing of Iran could solve the Iran problem. I pray that I am wrong, says Larry. Now that is very significant. Okay. I think Larry makes a good point, though. In fighting our recent wars, we have often become convinced by our own propaganda. This has been true, with respect to the Ukraine war. We constantly underestimated the capability of the Russians in that war. We've been constantly disappointed again and again and again. And we've continued to make the same mistakes of underestimating the military capability of the Russians, the staying power of the Russians, the increasing military power of the Russians, the resilience of the economy of Russia. We've been totally blind to the real facts. And we've suffered the consequences. NATO suffered the consequences in Ukraine, and Ukraine suffered those consequences because all these nations deluded themselves as to what the facts were. Now, this is occurring in terms of the Middle East too. It's obvious that the analysts who work for the government and our intelligence agencies have been wrong about the capabilities of Iran, and wrong in their analysis of those capabilities, even when the Iranians have demonstrated that, let's say, 32 of their hypersonic missiles were successful in striking the Nevatim air base. We still haven't accepted that. Our military people believe that that October 26th attack was successful in Iran. But it's a story we told, that some of our people told, and the rest of our people believed it. Now they've been telling that story to Trump and completely underestimating the power of Iran to strike back and, to turn aside an attack. And it's as if they don't know anything about what Russia has been doing to strengthen the capabilities of Iran since October of 2024. We are now 5 months away from that point, and the Russians have had 5 months to ship new defense system to Iran. Also Su-35 fighter jets to Iran, probably some bombers to Iran, maybe S-500 air defense systems to Iran. We don't know. But we know there have been a lot of shipments, and there have been a lot of trade, and there was a military alliance. We know this, but we don't have good intelligence about what was decided and what's been shipped and how Iran's defenses have been strengthened. Now, we know from Iranians' own, documentary films that they keep on building this huge underground missile capability. They're 5 months down the road from their own attack on October 1st, which was so successful, whose success we deny. But really, we seem deluded in our approach to Iran right now. We're certainly deluded in the threats that we're making, which suggests that Trump doesn't have the intelligence. He surrounded himself with staunch friends of Israel and Zionists, and they are feeding him information that is delusional, that's coming directly from the Israelis, designed to pull us into the war. And Trump doesn't seem to see that. His current attack on Yemen, it's killed civilians to no purpose. It doesn't seem to be having a heavy effect. As soon as the attacks took place, the Yemenis retaliated with devastating attacks on Israel and with attacks on our naval vessels. The current attacks on Yemen don't seem successful at all and seem to indicate once more the underestimation of the capability of an opponent by ourselves. Now, I'm sure our intelligence agencies are better than the information that Trump is evidently getting. But what's going on is probably there is this pattern inside of the intelligence agencies that the intelligence fed to them from the bottom and the middle levels gets turned aside by the top levels because they don't want to tell Trump anything he doesn't want to hear. There were people such as Ray McGovern, okay, and Larry Johnson and Colonel Wilkerson. They all believed that Tulsi Gabbard would tell Trump the truth. Well, if she's telling him the truth as she sees it, then that truth has not gotten through to her yet. And that disturbs me because we're on the brink of war with Iran, and Trump is making decisions not based on an accurate analysis of what the United States is facing. So, with these comments, I end this particular article. Okay, I will move on to the wrap up, with Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson after I consider whether you have any comments on this.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it pretty much sums up everything. The U.S. propaganda, U.S. believing its own propaganda, and stupidity of the U.S. government, no matter who's in power. It's that one-sided thinking, not paying attention to what's been going on, especially where Iran's concerned, where any country's concerned. They're living in this period where they're thinking that the U.S. is supreme. We're supreme. We have the best of everything, and other people don't have the quality that we have. This is the mindset. And then they find out something completely different once they start whatever plan they have.
Yes. Yes, it's absolutely true. They don't. I think the intelligence people and the national security advisors and the secretaries of state in our government create screens around our presidents, and they will not tell the truth to our presidents. They tell the presidents what they want to hear. And I think that problem is particularly serious with respect to Trump, because he's the kind of person who favors people who tells him what he wants to hear.
Right. They know his personality.
He doesn't like to hear any negative stuff. Now, I had hope, along with the others, that he chose Tulsi because he figured he needed someone who would tell him the truth. But so far, at least, there's no evidence that she's telling him the truth. It could be because she doesn't have the truth
Mm-hmm.
at this point, because as the DNI, she has to get the truth, from the other intelligence agencies. God knows if they're telling her the truth.
Right. We don't know that.
We don't know that, right? Evelina says Russia doesn't seem to have any designs on Odessa, does it? Unless, of course, the war drags on, and it becomes inevitable. Well, from the statements that Putin made, it seems that now, with the Ukrainian army, starting to melt away, they do desire to get the whole of Novorossiya back. And the whole of Novorossiya included Kharkov, or Kharkiv, as the Iranians called it. Also Dnipropetrovsk, Okay, these first two I mentioned, okay, are oblasts as well as cities. There's a city of Kharkov, of course. It's the second largest, okay, of all the Ukrainian cities, but it is predominantly a Russian city. The oblast, the third oblast of Mykolaiv, okay, and then the Odessa oblast as well. So these are four more oblasts, and when Russia adds them, they will have taken between 40 and 50% of Ukraine. So the remainder of Ukraine will be far smaller. And also, insofar as population comes back to Ukraine, a lot of that population may seek to return to the Russian oblasts as well, because those oblasts are going to be rebuilt by Russia and rebuilt extremely well, because the Russians consider them, to be predominantly Russian, and they take care of their own. And so they're going to do that. So I think that 4 more of the oblasts will come soon, because the Ukrainian army is on the verge of collapse. And the Russians, will happily annex those 4 additional oblasts. Evelyn asks, I wonder how it compares to St. Petersburg aesthetically. I mean, well, St. Petersburg is reported, I've never been there, but reportedly a very, very beautiful city. It was built in, the early 18th century by Peter the Great, which is where the name comes from. And Catherine the Great, of course, was the Tsar who was, responsible for the building of Odessa. So undoubtedly, she, would have tried to make it a city just as beautiful as St. Petersburg. And I've heard that that's a beautiful city too, but I don't know if it's beautiful in the same way. I think it has more of an Oriental cast, actually, to it. I think there's more Turkic influence. Okay, Odessa is supposed to be a very international city with all kinds of ethnic groups in it. And it's supposed to be very vibrant also from the intellectual point of view. That's what I've heard. And very dynamic. I think the Russians are anxious to get it back and to take it over. For them, it's a very historically important city. Okay, so that gets us to our final object for tonight.
Okay.
And that is the wrap-up session that was given on the Judging Freedom show. And it's the Intel Roundtable with Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, and the judge asking them questions. I'm very interested to go through this because I think we'll see the differences in the thinking between Larry and Ray. And I think those are very interesting. So, I guess I'm sharing that now, which is good, and I will just start.
I've never seen such an amazing cleaning product. It's just like magic.
This incredible product dissolves oven grease and
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, March 28th, 2025. It's the end of the day, the end of the week, our favorite time. It's the Intelligence Community Roundtable with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. My dear friends, welcome here. Thank you for the double duty that you're doing. Thank you for all the notes and tips and info that you send me throughout the week. Larry, thank you for those wonderful write-ups that you send out under Sonar 21. They come out at midnight, and they're extremely informative and fascinating. Larry, to you first. We got to delve right into the Signal text because more information keeps coming out. Is Jeff Goldberg Mossad, Larry?
Certainly would likely have connections. The real culprit here in terms of how Goldberg got into that chat appears to be Alex Wong, chief of staff to Michael Waltz. And Wong has, let's call it a charitable checkered past in terms of association with Obama. His wife was one of the lead prosecutors against January 6th suspects. So, he's not exactly coming out of a mold of what you could call a Trump loyalist. And, it is beyond understandable. Well, let's put it this way. Here's what we know. His article comes out on Monday, and by Tuesday, the Democrats have this very sophisticated, coordinated signs, placards, attacks on this was staged. I mean, this was, I think, a hit job. It doesn't excuse having the chat on Signal, but frankly, the policy for that had been established before Trump took office.
All right, let me stop you. When you say this was staged and was a hit job, you are rejecting the Mike Waltz explanation he gave to Laura Ingraham that he inadvertently involved Goldberg because the number, he thought it was somebody else's number. You think somebody was trying to sabotage them?
Yeah.
Why would Mike Waltz?
Okay, so you were speculating very early, in the stream, Evelina, that this was a setup. Larry Johnson is now confirming that, and he even has a name about who set it up. Okay, now, of course, the why is that they're trying to pull Trump into a war with Iran. That, of course, is the obvious motive. They're trying to convince Trump to get totally behind what Netanyahu wants him to do.
His chief of staff want to sabotage his own boss
Because he's got a history with Obama. They're not. He's not a Trump fan. This is there are a number of people. I've talked with Larry Wilkerson about this as well. He knows of some specific people who are still in the National Security Council who are, to call them toxic would be an understatement. They are not Trump loyalists. Now, again, this whole thing about the process. Oh, why did they use Signal? Why were they chatting about this? It ignores the real central issue that the Trump administration made a determination sometime at least a week prior to March 15th, when the bombings took place, to order the bombing of Yemen when Yemen had not done a single thing to break the ceasefire had not launched a single attack on any ship, had not launched a single missile into Israel. And so here was Yemen, the Houthis, having not taken any kind of provocative action, that the Trump administration decided on its own to attack it. That, in my view, is a war crime because they didn't attack military targets. They ended up hitting civilian targets, as you've been able to show through your conversations with Pepe.
Ray, the target was the apartment building of the girlfriend of their chief missile guy. Now, when Mike Walsh says something like that on the Signal chat, is he not revealing serious methods of gathering intel to anybody who would look at this, whether friend or foe?
Use this tool to weld loose railings.
Sorry, folks.
It takes just 2 seconds to weld a spot. And with
Well, the smart money says that it was Mossad, the Israeli service, that helped pinpoint that location. But no one should be surprised that the U.S. would be adopting Israeli tactics by just destroying a building in which.
By the way, following that attack on that building, the Houthis, Ansar Allah, they immediately retaliated with a hypersonic missile attack on the headquarters of Mossad in Tel Aviv. And they hit the headquarters of Mossad. They damaged it. I don't know how extensive the damage was, but they immediately retaliated against the source of the attack on them. So I think that needs to be noted here.
Civilians still are and still live until the bomb hits. So the glee that was expressed by, oh, way to go, excellent. I mean, I'm less interested in the provenance of this thing as in what it reflects about the, what's the word? Sociopathic nature of these guys who think they can kill civilians without any declaration of war, without even mentioning this stuff to Congress. They'll do it willy-nilly. Why? Because they can and because Israel wants them to do it.
So, Larry, no declaration of war, no compliance with the War Powers Act. The target was a residential building, and the human being they were targeted was not a military person. It's a war crime ordered by Donald Trump and facilitated by everybody or nearly everybody on that call. One person was on the call who didn't say a peep. Witkoff, who was in Moscow and didn't want to communicate because he thought whatever his communications were would be surveilled by the Russians. But you said earlier, war crime.
Well, yeah, but you know, let's go back to George W. Bush. He was doing this kind of thing. Then Barack Obama.
Yes.
Then Donald Trump, and then Joe Biden, and now Donald Trump again. I mean, look, it's not unique to Trump. And I'm not trying to excuse or exonerate him, but we've got a fundamental problem with our system, our society, because we accept this uncritically and have accepted it now for 25 years.
If your theory is correct that it was Alex Wong, shouldn't there be some sort of an investigation? I mean, we're talking about military operational plans that were exposed. That's espionage, whether it's done intentionally or inadvertently. I assume that Mr. Wong has a top secret security clearance. He should lose it like that, shouldn't he, Larry?
Well, as I understand, you know, the U.S. Code 18, that for espionage, yeah, it is distributing that information, but the other part of it is intent to do harm. Now,
there's actually two espionage statutes. It is the second one is the rare federal criminal statute that does not require intent, because we went through all this with Hillary. So there's one espionage statute that says knowingly and willfully exposed. There's another espionage statute that says negligently exposes.
Right, but they're going to be able to make the case because this communications over the signal channel had been sanctioned by approved by the intelligence community. Now, we can go back and say that was a stupid decision. And I'm not sure if that decision was first made under Obama or under Trump's first term or under Biden's term, but it was a decision that was already in place. This is nothing that the Trump people did. So that's why I think it would be very difficult to prosecute it simply because it had been an SOP. And these kind of conversations, frankly, they occur. Now, the problem, I agree, I share your outrage at the line, for people who go, no, this wasn't classified. Look, I only had 23 years handling this kind of information. And I guarantee you, if I would have written a message that had contained that entire conversation, I would have had to, at a minimum, put secret no foreign at the front of each paragraph, which is how you classify messages.
Right.
And so, the games are being played. But again, that's all a distraction. Let's focus on the fact that this unjustified, illegal attack on Yemen was allowed to happen, and nobody in the United States gives a damn.
Are you surprised, Ray McGovern, that in all of these texts, no one, not even the person who dissented from the decision to attack, his dissent was based on it's too soon, let's wait, Vice President Vance. No one raised the moral, the legal, or the constitutional issue of A, attacking Yemen, B, attacking civilians. Does this surprise you, Ray McGovern?
No, it doesn't, Judge, and that's the sad history of these times. When the emperor or the king or what's his name, only the president, gathers his people around together and says, "Look, we're going to do this. Moral? Come on, give me a break. Look what we're doing. We're enabling genocide by the Israelis. We're funding an army." And forgot the moral. A couple of Houthis, hello. There's no consideration of these things. And I would say that there's no end to this because clearly no one will be held accountable. And that's very clear since the Attorney General has just turned down any notion of an investigation. These people have immunity from being held accountable, and they'll keep acting this way unless there's someone in Congress, I don't know, maybe the judiciary will finally say, look, there's an Article 1 and an Article 2 of the Constitution. You're not allowed to do this, Mr. King, or Mr. President. You're not allowed to do this. It's the House of Representatives, the people's people, who decide whether we'll get into war or not. And you're really out of line, Mr. President. I'm going to rein you in. I live in hope for that day. It's not coming soon.
Hang on one second, because this is breaking news. Al Jazeera reports that the United States today, March 28th, hit dozens of Houthi targets in Yemen. U.S. airstrikes hit more than 40 locations across Yemen, including in Sana'a, that's where Pepe Escobar is, with at least 7 people injured. And then I want to play the clip. I know you want to jump in, Larry, but I want to follow up on what Ray said with a clip from the Attorney General of the United States. And Larry, you tell me if she sounds like the chief law enforcement officer of the land or a two-bit political hack. Number 14.
In terms of the signals chat controversy that's going on, is DOJ involved at this point? If so, why? If not, why not?
Well, first, it was sensitive information, not classified, and inadvertently released. And what we should be talking about is it was a very successful mission. Our world is now safer because of that mission. We're not going to comment any further on that. If you want to talk about classified information, talk about what was at Hillary Clinton's home that she was trying to bleach bit, talk about the classified documents in Joe Biden's garage that Hunter Biden had access to. This was not classified information, and we are very pleased with the results of that operation and that the entire world is safer because of it.
Oh, she's full of shit.
Yeah. Look over there at that guy standing under the tree.
Yeah.
Look at me.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that guy under the
Yeah.
tree.
Social media can't stop sharing this hydrogen water bottle. It supports healthy aging and wellness. Watch this video now before it's taken down.
Does she know what the hell she's talking about?
Well, the claiming that the world's safer, no, and claiming that the operation was a grand success, no, and that was the point I was going to make. That in that entire discussion that took place on Signal, nobody raised the point about when we do this, what does it actually achieve? What do we accomplish? What goal is met? What does this do to the dynamics in the region? Nobody's thinking like a chess player 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. They act like they're playing Pac-Man. You know, it's just immediate reaction. Turn right, turn left, turn right, turn left. And that's the problem. That, you know, here we are now 2 weeks and they hit 40 targets today. Okay. And I guarantee you the Houthis are going to fire missiles back. They're going to fire at those ships. They may get, you know, they may hit and sink one of those ships. And then, you know, Trump's going to have a lot of egg on his face. And the use of military force to accomplish a specific objective is usually the idea. And yet the United States has a proven track record now going back 25 years where we use military force and we don't accomplish anything.
You know, Ray, I'm really aggravated at what the Attorney General said. The FBI should investigate this, whether they're going to prosecute somebody or not, just so we can find out exactly what happened and how it happened. The Department of Defense's own guidelines, Larry, you alluded to this earlier, state that operational plans are classified, whether they're marked classified or not. Everybody in the government that has a top secret security clearance knows that. How can anybody take at face value what the Attorney General just said, Ray McGovern?
Okay, long ago, very, very long ago, back in the 1960s, I worked for a defense research outfit in Buffalo. And I had a secret clearance. And I knew back then, from the middle of the 1960s, when I got that secret clearance, that for something to be secret, you don't have to stamp it secret. If it's an operational plan of any kind, it is automatically secret. It is automatically classified. And if you reveal it, you are open to prosecution. Now that's 60 years ago, folks. 60 years ago, 59 years anyway, since I got that secret clearance.
Judge, your outrage is completely warranted, but it's outdated. Nobody gives a rat's patootie about what the law says anymore. Now, what Larry just described is what should have happened, and we have no indication that it did happen before Trump ordered his minions to do this kind of attack on Yemen. There's something called a Special National Intelligence Estimate, which Tulsi Gabbard is now in charge of. She should have said to the president, look, before you do this, let us set out what the repercussions will be and whether it has any appreciable chance of achieving your aim, Mr. President. Your aim, again, what did you say your aim was? Okay, well, we could tell her an estimate to tell you how good this operation will be in those terms. Now, that never happens anymore. The intelligence community is not even consulted. I'm 90% sure that Trump didn't ask for such an estimate and that Tulsi Gabbard didn't have the cojones to offer one. So you're left with a president who is by definition mercurial, unpredictable, he tells his minions to do this, they don't say, hey, what about this or what about that? They just do it in a kind of, well, sociopathic way. Listen to that conversation. I'm ashamed to be led by this kind of breed of folks that lead our Defense Department and our national security establishment. I don't give a rat's patootie how this happened, what that shows about the United States of America, what it's become, and the immunity accorded to these kinds of people to do these kinds of things speaks enough volumes for me.
Okay, so it's clear that with respect to the attack on Yemen, there wasn't that kind of assessment. I sincerely hope that when it comes to the contemplated attack on Iran, that before that attack goes ahead, there is that national intelligence assessment run by Tulsi Gabbard that is called for by the president and that gets to the president, because he really needs to see something like that before the bombers start to move. That's essential, because I'm sure such an intelligence assessment will come up with many more objections than I was able to offer tonight, and many more predictions about what could possibly go wrong.
Larry, when Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed, the three of us rejoiced. I think that joy is short-lived. I think she's right in the camp of the neocons now. There's not a word in there about her, from her, unless she communicated by some other means, advising against this.
It is 2025 now. If you're not wearing glasses that you can immediately turn into sunglasses whenever you want, or
Well, actually, her chief of staff, Joe Kent, did weigh in on that talk, and I don't think he would have weighed in without her support. And he said, "Look, what's the rush? Why are we pushing this?" Tulsi doesn't have the strongest position within the Trump administration, and I understand sort of her caution in watching her back. Let's give her credit, even though this recent intelligence, security threat assessment that was released on last Monday by the director of national intelligence, I doubt she had little input into it, but it did reaffirm once more that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, which then raises the question, because Trump and Waltz and Hegseth are all insisting that the exact opposite, which is not a position supported by the intelligence community. So I think it remains to be seen whether Tulsi will step up and insist that no, there's no justification to attack Iran on the basis that they're building a nuclear weapon, because they are not.
When when Mike Waltz said, quote, "Never met, don't know, never communicated with Goldberg," is that believable?
No, it's not believable at all. I mean, you can see that photo of him standing right in front of him at the White House. No, they lie, Judge. You gotta sort of get accustomed to the fact that you can't believe a damn thing they say. And just the codicil to what Larry just said about Tulsi Gabbard, he has already made her major input here. That assessment says Iran has stopped working on a nuclear weapon since the end of 2003, has not resumed work, and the supreme leader has prohibited work on this.
Is Netanyahu going to show up with a Mossad report, Larry, that says the opposite in order to twist Donald's arm to get him to go along with the bombing Tehran?
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it, but I think Ray's point is spot on, that at least the intelligence community has not surrendered on this one issue.
Right.
And in fact, I suspect Witkoff, as a result of his discussions with Putin, has learned that as a result of that agreement that Russia signed with Iran on 17 January, that Russia is even in the position of guaranteeing that they're not going to permit Iran to build a nuclear weapon. That is part of the, if you will, the quid pro quo of this security arrangement that Russia has now signed on to with Iran.
Are you impressed with Witkoff, Larry?
As a seemingly nice man, yes, but as having any understanding of what he's doing, no. I mean, his comments, particularly, were really repugnant with respect to Hamas, where he said, "Oh, I haven't talked to them and haven't dealt with them directly, and I've only gone through Qatar." And then he repeated all the Zionist propaganda about beheadings and rapes and all that garbage. And yet, if he was consistent, he would have followed through on what he said when he was talking to Tucker about dealing with the Russians, which is, hey, we have to have communication. Both sides need to talk. We need to hear it out from both sides. You know what? Great advice. Do it with Hamas. But instead, he's latched on to this Zionist fantasy that if they just destroy Iran, all of Israel's problems will go away and it'll be paradise, and birds will be singing and squirrels will be picking up nuts.
Ray, is the intelligence community today not?
If you're unsure or unaware of your eyeglass
Sorry about all these
prescription,
ads. That's
or
what
if your
gotta
prescription changes
live with,
frequently due to nearsight,
Tailoring intel to please their bosses in the Oval Office and the West Wing, as you and Larry and the others have told me for a couple of years now, was done under Biden?
The answer is yes and no. Okay.
Okay.
Now, on important matters like this, and this is of supreme importance, they even said on this Iran section that the Supreme Leader Khamenei has made sure that this won't happen, that they won't work on a nuclear weapon, and until he reauthorizes what he forbade in 2003, they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. That's so big. Now, why did I say yes, they are tailoring it? Well, there's nothing about climate change. Climate change is still two words that are forbidden. You think about the national security implications as well as the human implications of that. It used to be at the top of the national assessment. Well, Mr. Trump doesn't like to hear that, so it was it was non-existent in this thing. Other things like, the border and the fentanyl and all that stuff, that came first, even before Russia, China, Iran, and all that. So reordering the thing to please Trump's thing, yes. Substantively, they didn't say that Putin had already lost in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, they said just the opposite, that Putin was winning. So there's some hope that there are enough courageous, enough honest people in the bowels of the CIA and elsewhere that they will help Tulsi to the degree she is interested in telling the truth.
How much longer can Ukraine hold out, Larry?
Well, according to Budanov, the head of one of their intelligence organizations, end of June, without renewed funding from the United States, without renewed supply of weapons.
That's the head of Ukraine intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said that's a couple of months ago. And, Putin talked yesterday to the sailors of the North Sea Fleet, nuclear submarine. And he spelled out, he said, we have 99% of Lugansk, but Donetsk and Zaporozhye and the other one up there,
Kherson,
we only have 70% of that. Now, we can get the rest of it. We can get it right quick, but we're in no rush. And that's the reality on the field. Most important is this midshipman asks Commander-in-Chief Putin, this is really important. He says, Petty Officer 2 Class Ivan Dominin, today the world's attention is focused on negotiations between Russia and the United States. We have a dialogue. If possible, I would like to hear firsthand. Petty officer to the
petty officer is saying this to President Putin. Go ahead, Ray. This is fascinating.
If possible, I'd like to hear firsthand about the progress and the outcome of those talks. Putin, не беспокойтесь. Don't worry about it. Do not concern yourself with this. Simply carry out your service and fulfill your duty. Laughter, lots of laughter. And then he says, that was a joke. I understand that everyone in the world is looking at this closely, following these developments. In this regard, I would like to state the following, that first and foremost, in my view, the newly elected president of the United States sincerely wishes to end this conflict for a number of reasons, which I won't go into right here, as they are numerous. But in my opinion, the aspiration is genuine. Now, that is surprising to me that here, just a couple of months into Trump's regime, so to speak, Putin is taking the risk internally of saying, this guy can be trusted because he's sincere. That's a sea change. And of course, Witkoff has said the same thing about Putin. So you can't overlook these things. There's going to be peace in Ukraine. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Right. These things are.
So that point of Ray's is very, very important. There seems to be some level of feeling between Trump and Putin that the other side is sincere and wants to work out all the difficulties. Whether this will be enough, especially since all the people working with Trump are probably trying to sabotage the development of any lasting trust between the two men, I don't know. But at least the two principals seem to have a favorable view of the other. That's important for actually getting to a peaceful settlement.
They're head scratchers.
Genocide.
Larry, Trump is a monster in Gaza and a monster in Yemen, and is doing absolutely the right thing with respect to Ukraine, although he should be turning off the spigot of military gear, Larry.
Have you seen this? It's absolutely insane. Look at the presentation on what's inside this can. All other canned tuna brands should be.
Yeah, except the problem is his actions in Iran. If he does choose to try to attack Iran, could undo what he's trying to accomplish with Putin.
I would think if he does either attack Iran or give Bibi the green light, the negotiations with Putin will fail.
Yeah, well,
that's the biggie. Yeah, that's why it's so unlikely.
Yeah, they got that security, the comprehensive security agreement that was signed, and it was very nuanced. But the one section where they didn't have an explicit mutual defense clause. However, the clause that did deal with basically it said something to the effect, if Iran is attacked under terms of Article 51, where it's an unjustified attack on Iran, yeah, then Russia would get involved. But the Russia didn't commit itself that regardless of what fight you get into, we're going to have your back. No, they didn't commit themselves that far. So
will Netanyahu, Ray, attack Iran without the U.S. military support?
I don't know. Netanyahu is unpredictable. Depends largely on domestic internal problems that he has there in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I just don't know. But if he does, the big question is, will Trump allow himself to be sucked into this thing to the degree that there be a worldwide recession or depression, that we'll be paying 10, 15 bucks for a gallon of gas at the gas station? I think that being transactional and having Witkoff at his side, he'll understand that the stakes here are extremely high, not only World War III, but economic collapse. And the Russians and the Chinese have a deep stake in preventing this. And during those 2 hours that Putin and Trump talked together, I am sure, morally certain, that Iran came up and that Putin said, look, we don't need to let Bibi do what he wants to do in Iran. If he does, this is what's going to happen, Mr. President. You don't need that. Forget about it.
Larry, same question. Will Netanyahu attack Iran without American military support?
No, I'd say no, simply because they don't have the capability. They require U.S. air support. They require U.S. ISR support. They don't. Israel on its own lacks the ability to actually carry that out. As we saw on October 27th, the October 27th attack was facilitated, enabled by the United States, and even then, with U.S. support, they weren't able to carry it out or complete it.
Okay.
The caveat there, in my view, is that all these supersonic or hypersonic or whatever they are bombers are convening in Diego Garcia. There is a widespread preparation for war, and Bibi might.
They're not hypersonic bombers convening in Diego Garcia. Both the B-52s and the B-2s are subsonic. They are subsonic. They don't even get to the speed of sound. The fighter bombers are much, much faster, but they don't have the capability to carry the tactical nukes. So we have to keep that in mind.
Think that he can mousetrap the U.S. into a war with Iran, as he's tried to do many times. This time he may be a little desperate because of his internal problems. So I wouldn't rule it out. It's just that the U.S. may be giving the wrong signal by sending all these heavy bombers and missiles and so forth into the area, leading Netanyahu to think, well, they'll be mousetrapped into that. I'll just go ahead and start it. They can't possibly stop supporting us.
I neglected to run this clip a few minutes ago when we were talking about Tulsi Gabbard. This is the cross-examination of her by Jason Crow, Congressman Crow, Captain, United States Army, 82nd Airborne Division, and a Ranger. Really impressed me with this interrogation of her, and Director Gabbard looked like she'd rather be anywhere on the planet at that time, but where she was. Chris, cut number 10.
Director Gabbard, I want to direct your attention again to the text chain where it says, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. Does that indicate to you that there is about to be a military operation?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, earlier in this hearing, we heard about the DoD's classification standards. I want to now turn my attention to your classification standards. You're the Director of National Intelligence. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence classification guide says, quote, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing for an attack, end quote, is to be classified as top secret. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, have the Houthis indicated an ability to shoot down American aircraft?
Yes.
They have in fact done so, haven't they?
Yes.
Including MQ-9 Reapers, haven't they?
That's correct.
And that was one of the systems used in the attack recently that's the subject of this discussion, is it not?
Correct.
This one easy trick will save you thousands when buying a used car. Did you know that some dealerships will clear the check engine codes off their cars?
What are your thoughts, Larry?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this once we understand that this system for signal had been previously approved, and then they're using it, they were sloppy. And yes, they discussed classified information, but focusing on the process, to me, misses the most important point. It's not the process. Not a member of the Democrats was outraged about bombing and killing women and children. Not a damn one of them.
You're right.
Oh, you said classified stuff. Get to the heart of the issue. You're killing civilians. And instead of making that the issue.
Ray is the
That's the second time in this stream that Larry has brought that up. And he's absolutely right about that. And this time, of course, he pointed to the Democrats. And he said, That's the central issue here. That's the most important thing, that they were talking about having an attack on civilians without a declaration of war. That's a war crime. And the Democrats failed to call it out. They, like the Republicans, are so used to the United States committing war crimes that they never even mention it anymore. They tacitly accept it.
It's outrageous.
Is the passion to kill bipartisan and caused everybody in the government to lose their sense of morality and decency?
Of course, Judge. And, I go back to Obama when he authorized these strikes on American citizens. Yeah, had weird last names, but they were American citizens. And John Brennan gave them a list every Thursday. These are the ones you kill this week. And if they were American citizens like Aulaki and his son, well, they're terrorists. We're going to kill them. And you have the Attorney General, what was his name under Obama?
Holder.
Yeah, well, he goes to Northwestern Law School and he says, look, the Constitution, it doesn't say legal. It says due process. It doesn't say legal process. And so we do due process right in the White House. Thank you very much. End of story.
Which is basically what the Trump administration is claiming. They're claiming the right. Well, they're claiming that their own decisions are replacements for due process, valid replacements for due process. That is a claim of totalitarians. That is an attitude that leads directly to totalitarianism. When you deny people due process, which the Trump administration wants to do all the time, that's what marks them as totalitarians. That's why we must oppose them with the whole fiber of our beings.
Larry and I took one oath only. You did too, Judge, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's why we have to keep putting the word out here so American citizens can see this is close to the end times here. If we don't stand up, nobody else is going to. In Congress, maybe the Supreme Court. We have to do what we can to spread the word around. And I applaud you for pursuing these issues.
Yeah.
Larry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I agree. This is we've got too much acquiescence going on, and again, it's they want to play this as partisan football, the gotcha stuff, instead of dealing with the central moral question. In God's name, how many people do we have to kill before we learn that all of our killing doesn't bring peace? We've killed, thousands in Afghanistan. We killed thousands in Iraq, hundreds of thousands. And we've helped facilitate the murder and death of thousands in Syria and now in Palestine. I mean, good God, when does it stop? We did it in Vietnam. Enough.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your expertise. Have a great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you both on Monday morning.
All right, Judge.
You too, Judge. Thanks.
All the best. Thank you.
And that is it. I think that was quite a wrap-up.
I think so too. And I think we're all prepared right
I'm sorry, say that again?
I think you've got us all prepared for the week ahead.
I think so too. And it was the right sort of preparation because it made us alive again. It mentioned the central moral issues of what we are involved in here and what the United States is involved in here. There are war crimes. There's a moral dimension to it all. This administration is ignoring the moral dimension, and it is beginning to commit the war crimes that characterized the Biden administration for so many years.
It's like same shit, different administration.
Yes. Evelina speaks of the Uni Party, and she says, on that note, peace.
Yeah, peace to you too.
Peace indeed. Peace to all of us. So let us say good night, Dee.
Yes, good night. And good night, everyone.
I think
And thank you, Joe.
We hit our peak of attendance, a moment ago. According to my indicator, we hit 65 people.
Oh, that's great. And more people will be watching, as we know, later on.
Yes. Thank you, Evelina. Evelina says, great show.
Yes, thank you, Evelina.
Okay, I'll be back on Tuesday. I don't know whether Dee has a show planned between now and Tuesday.
Okay, I have to check with Madeline, but we spoke during the week, and she said Sunday would be a good day for her. So most likely I will have a show tomorrow evening, unless, something should come up where Madeline can't. But from what I understand, we will be having a show tomorrow at 9 o'clock, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dee.
Thank you, Joe. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And good night. Have a wonderful weekend.
Yes, good night, everyone.
I am ending the stream now.